to House of Virginia. We meet again, now that our bellies are full of pizza and wine and cookies. So now we're going to try to think. No, that this is a good, I'm glad we're starting in on the prophets. And Joshua is kind of a bridge into the prophets. And Jetty gave you quite a bit of material. There are a couple of things that I want to highlight, and then we'll let her wax forth, and then I have some material from one of the chapters of Joshua that we could look at tonight also. But something that was in this lesson 7 transcript you read on from the archaeology of the Bible really struck me because it raised a lot of information in just a couple of paragraphs. And it's good to give us perspective about the time frame we're talking about with these documents. They talk about Mosaic law and Deuteronomy and then moving on. So let's pick up the thread of the story with the first book of the prophets, the book of Joshua. This is on page 99 in that lesson 7 transcript. The story of the Israelites in the promised land. These stories actually coincide with some very important changes at the dawn of the 12th century. Historians call this new era the Iron Age, and it's certainly true that the growing use of metal tools was a key feature of this period. But even more important was the emergence of the linear alphabets instead of the pictograph or cuneiform writing of the Bronze Age. The first was the Phoenician alphabet, which emerged somewhere around 11th century BC. A century later, so now we're talking 10th BC, the Hebrew alphabet with several variations in Aramaic. And finally, because of Phoenicia's trade throughout the Mediterranean world, then came the Greek alphabet, which is the basis for our modern style of writing. So things are just beginning to be written down. In 12th century, Jetty can tell you about the Menerptah Stele, which they can pretty precisely date as 1208 BCE. And the first mention of the
yeah, so this is difficult to copy. If you go online and you go to Wikipedia, I got other archaeologists, Julie Magnus, but I thought this is good information to get in front of Wikipedia. And it's the Menerptah Stele that is found in 1800, and that was the Menerptah is from a pharaoh in the time of in Egypt, where the Israelites were slaves. And there is written, if you following the page where you see all those points of the hieroglyphics, you see that they refer to Israel, and this is, according to the archaeological finding, the exact period where Israel, what was to another people, became a people because the Menerptah Pharaoh wrote it down.
Oh.
And they left Egypt on a particular time. So there was a people that was there in that time. I don't know exact the time of the Exodus.
I don't know either when it was, but 1200 BCE is the first written, and if you read the handout more closely, you'll find out that the word being used for Israel and those other communities
So if you see,
is more of a group, but not a place.
So if you see a male and a woman, which means people. So
And the three lines underneath.
That means people. And if you go online, you see the photo of the Menerptah, you see exact what is there with the enlightenment. You can, and then you can measure it with this, that there was a study about 4 or 5 different archaeologists, and they came to the same understanding that the translation of the word from that pharaoh was the exact Israel. So we see this is accurate founding in the archaeological time frame.
Right. There were some later scholars, but who had different theories. This one is the one that's held up, that they do believe that the word is Israel, or Israelites.
And there was a small thing.
This written here says shown in reverse to match the English translation. So when they were inscribing this on the stone, did they start over here?
You have to go from the right to the left.
They reversed it.
They reversed.
Right. Okay. That's what I thought.
But here is the hieroglyphics still. We're not into alphabets yet. We're not into the Hebrew language yet, or Aramaic, and certainly not Greek.
They said a lot though with these little bitty pictures.
It is amazing.
That they were able to tell us.
And they didn't have much of arguing in this because they really saw, okay, this was really Israel.
Right.
But later on, of course, there were not a people like God said, but they became a people. And they knew them from the Israelites, and then they became Israel. So now it would be good if you found that colored photo of the Menerptah Stele, because I have it in copied, or you can see it in the documents that I sent. You see really the colored one. And then you see the inscription they take on, and then you can really understand the way how they describe it. See that he's not scratching in the chair, in the couch, because he's a very famous actor in that.
So, find a nice lap, boy. Yes, you go find him.
And you see also that Israel waste, seed grain, that means that Israel was in a land of waste, was nothing. Waste is always, there is nothing, it's gone. There's nothing to conquer, there's nothing in the surrounding. So they were really wondering, like they was leaving the Exodus. Coming through, and then with Moses. So I found it very interesting to find that one with Joshua. You see that archaeological, it is a yes or a no, or an in between, or they argue until they die by themselves or whatever. But this is really an accurate thing that has been found, and you can build on that.
Yes.
Well, if you come to Joshua, there's another word to say about that, right? So if you want to know more, I will find more. I will leave it to my teacher now.
There's quite a bit in there. It was a nomadic people without a fixed state owned. semi-nomadic or rural status for Israel at that time. As she said, the phrase wasted, bare of seed, is a formulaic saying, was often used of defeated nations, like their grain store had been destroyed, so they're incapacitated and they won't survive any military threat. So, Israelite at that point is stateless, it doesn't have its own land, and other Canaanite groups were fought by Egypt, and many of them are described as very nascent or early stages of becoming a separate people, if you will. So we're on the edge of what we would call history here. And the Bible gives us some in their day and time, history as we know it was not that much of interest to them, really. That was a later development. But they were interested in making the case that in all these battles, if you go through the book of Joshua, there are battles upon battles, and they don't really emphasize the power of fighting. They conclude with the power of God in each case. So they are attributing their success, be it proverbial battles, some of which did occur, no doubt, because in one place I read they had identified like 31 of these small nascent states that were not really established in a particular locale, but they have found archaeologically about 20 of them. One of them more famous than Jericho, because Jericho actually, at the time this book was being written, virtually disappeared. But there were other city-state beginnings where they actually can archaeologically track them down and in some cases find that there actually probably was some kind of battle there. In other cases, they don't find evidence of the battles, but they find remnants of those towns. Was one of those in
I think it's in the settlement. Settlement of the Promised Land. It's only about the city.
there was
Page 101, second paragraph from the bottom, talks about the 31 cities,
oh yeah.
and 20 identified.
That's what I've done.
If you can have, that's where you.
It's all in the second.
Who's the mixed up? I mean, what I was reading,
Jericho.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about the Jericho. And yeah, and 31 cities, you said it was on 101?
Yeah.
101 is the second paragraph from the bottom.
Oh, thank you.
That's what there is.
Yeah.
20 identified.
The story is really powerful if you read it. They came and they marched around the walls 7 times, carrying the Ark of the Covenant with the sacred tablets of the 10 Commandments, and 7 priests
That's wonderful.
blasted away. And then on the 7th day, when the soldiers finished their 7th round. The priests are blowing on their horns. The people let out a mighty war cry. And with that, the walls of Jericho come tumbling down. And so there are many discussions about that, of course.
So in this excavation, they don't quite find something that is related to the walls came tumbling down.
You know,
That happened way back. Jericho was already defeated.
yeah,
But what they found is really a thick wall where there were houses built on the wall, like, the prostitute Rahab, who is taking care of Caleb and Joshua. They really found that in Jericho, that really those prostitutes were living against the wall, where of course when the people came in and, yeah, so that has been found. But what is really also fascinating again, here if you see the map of Jerusalem and all this, here you have Jericho, and up top a little bit further is Hazor.
yeah,
Hazor is conquered by the Israelites.
yeah.
And they excavated it there, that there were the Israelites conquering the Philistines.
Yeah.
And that is more related to what could have happened
Yeah.
the Jericho story.
Yeah.
So it is very close to, it's really close to the Jericho, but you know how it goes over centuries. And when I tell you a story,
Yeah.
the telephone story goes to, but there is the most excavation
Yeah.
founded on Hazor.
Right.
It says in the handout here, Jericho was already one of the oldest cities on earth, and it stayed that way in our modern times. Archaeologists have found layers of no fewer than 21 successive settlements going back to 9,000 BCE.
That's way back.
During the Neolithic or New Stone Age period.
See, that's further than Egypt, because we can go back in our timelines to 3,000, but if you go to the Egyptians, we can go to 5,000. So,
and this is way even before them. So that is awesome. Jericho really was very.
And it's a very old city. I've been there. Very old and a very big olive tree.
There was an archaeologist, a British archaeologist, discovered a number of ancient settlements built with mud brick. She also found a mysterious tower 30 feet in diameter that may have been used for observation, for sacrifice, or some other religious use. So that's amazing that the 21 successful settlements. You could just dig down and dig down and dig down.
It's everywhere where you start digging all those layers from other environments of other people, they found so much more than maybe, let me say, 100 years back, because sometimes they have proof and they say, let's go back. And there is now more money than ever to support all those groups to do that. And they found a lot
better techniques to.
And also with those 3 dimensions out of the computer,
Oh,
you can really go in and then make you a drawing of
it. Yeah, amazing.
It's interesting. Again,
They also say the Bible portrays a victorious march by a conquering army, but was probably more of a gradual infiltration in areas that were unlikely to get the locals upset. As for example, 101.
Yeah.
For example, the highlands where the topsoil was dry and agriculture was difficult. And that makes sense when you remember that any migrating groups from Egypt after a long trip through the desert would not have the heavy weapons needed to subdue the Canaanites. At this time, as the Bible admits, many Canaanite cities had equipped themselves with cutting-edge Iron Age technology, such as the composite bow and chariots drawn by fast horses. But there is one exception, and that is the city you mentioned, Hazor, which clearly have been the scene of a battle.
Yep.
So it's like, to me, the Hebrew Bible gives us a sense of how they tried to make sense of their history over several hundred years. And some aspects, like the Hazor thing, is apparently very accurate, that the Israelites did conquer. But in a lot of areas, it was more a simulation. And they're telling the story with the theology in their story is, you do not have greatness of your own. It is God that gives it to you if you're going to have it. And so reading the book, particularly if you read chapters 23 and 24 in Joshua, these are kind of Joshua's last speeches to the people. And he reviews the history, as it were, and talks about where they've come from and where they're going. It's very beautiful to read that. And in the book itself, in various places, the story depicts one or another battles. I mean, kind of Bibles. Yes, I'm thinking.
Why?
I didn't have a drop, you guys.
Maybe you want one, that's why you say bottles.
Well, I'll have mine after.
Leave a bottle in the Battle of Jericho. Chapter 20?
Chapter 6 is where I am. Let me see if that's the one I want to talk about. Oh, I love the part about Rahab the whore. He is in the bloodline of Jesus.
Right?
And Rahab the whore and her father's house and all that was hers, Joshua kept alive. And she has dwelt in the midst of Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers that Joshua had sent to spy out Jericho. And Joshua imposed a vow at that time, saying, "First to be the man before the Lord who will arise and rebuild this town, Jericho. With his firstborn shall he found it, and with his youngest set up its portal. And the Lord was
Read it louder, honey. Leslie needs to hear it too.
Am I reading well enough?
Yeah, I can hear some of it, but not all.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to read it again, because I want everybody to hear it. Rahab the whore and her father's house and all that was hers, Joshua kept alive. And she has dwelled in the midst of Israel to this day. For she hid the messengers that Joshua had sent to spy out Jericho. And Joshua imposed a vow at that time, saying, "Cursed be the man before the Lord who will arise and rebuild this town, Jericho. That's the end of chapter 6. And we have some commentary from Alter on that. He says, there is, of course, a contradiction here with the story of the collapse of the wall. If the wall around the town collapsed, how could Rahab, whose house was in the wall, have been saved? And what good would the scarlet cord, which implied protection against conscious human destroyers, have done? One suspects that the story of the two spies and the story and the story of the ram's horns reflect two different traditions about the conquest of Jericho. Indeed, if the plan was to bring down the walls miraculously, there would scarcely have been any need to reconnoiter the town and the surrounding terrain. And the tale of the spies appears to assume a scenario in which the Israelite warriors will break into the city using conventional means of warfare. So we see that Robert Alter does his own little looking at what is the logic or lack thereof. And we know these stories are not necessarily built on a completely logical premise, and they don't have to be. Talks about that some have proposed there was an earthquake that leveled Jericho, and he says there are extensive archaeological exploration shows that it was a very old town, but it was destroyed by the Middle Bronze Age, not at the time of Joshua's conquest. So that all ties together with what you had there, that we know that there's something written down in the early 1200s BCE that there is this entity of Israelites. They don't have a land, they're still nomadic. And then Hazor is actually physically a conquest. And that many of the other little spots, as you were, of enculturation and development, that many of those have actually been found. So we know that there is some good information coming back and forth between the archaeology and the biblical record, which I find fascinating.
But we should also remind ourselves when it was not written down, it was small plural. So the story went on and on. So you cannot really say it never happened. I mean,
it just probably didn't happen in the time frame.
Yeah. See?
Yeah.
Because Judy Magnus also said, you know, when you do an excavation and you put everything on the ground out, if you move one thing, a centimeter, the time changes 1,000 years.
Wow.
That's why they are so, you know, with the brushing was very sensitive to all that thing.
Wow.
Yeah. It's amazing.
It's very delicate work, obviously. Yeah. And there have been generations of these archaeologists, some who set out to try to prove a premise. We have some in the more literal biblical camps who have looked for relation to the Bible text. But what I think is more useful is to see how the text developed in its own time and the elements that are included in that text, which was, as you say, an oral text, that there are pieces of it that actually show up in the archaeological digs. It is a really, it's a scientific tool that has come to help us better understand what the world was like in the time that these things were written down. And, you know, they often were written down several hundred years after the events they're talking about. You know, so it's not an exact science, and the correlation is not going to be exact. But there's enough overlap that it's very intriguing. We know that these were not mythologies that were written whole cloth out of nothing. They were written out of people's experience and the oral tradition they passed down. So you get a chance to read chapters 23 and 24. I'm going to see if I can. Read part of 24. And this again is Robert Alter's translation. I'll try to speak up. And Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel at Shechem, and he called to the elders of Israel, and to its chieftains, and to its judges, and to its overseers. So notice there's quite a bit of organization being told here. And they stood forth before God. And Joshua said to all the people, "Thus said the Lord God of Israel." Now this is why the Hebrews regard him as a prophet. He is speaking to the people. "Your forefathers dwelled across the Euphrates long ago. Terah, father of Abraham and father of Nahor, and they served other gods. And I took your father Abraham from across the Euphrates and led him to the land of Canaan. And I multiplied his seed and gave him Isaac. And I gave to Isaac Jacob and Esau. And I gave to Esau the high country of Seir to take hold of. But Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. And I sent Moses and Aaron, and I struck Egypt with plagues that I wrought in its midst. And afterward, I brought you out. And I brought your forefathers out of Egypt. And you came to the sea. And the Egyptians pursued your forefathers with chariots and horsemen in the sea of reeds. And they cried out to the Lord, and he put a veil of darkness between you and the Egyptians, and brought the sea against them, and it covered them. And your own eyes saw that which I wrought against Egypt. And you dwelled in the wilderness many years. And I brought you to the land of the Amorites dwelling across the Jordan. And they did battle against you. And I gave them into your hand, and you took hold of their land. And I destroyed them before you. And Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, rose up and did battle against Israel. And he sent out and called Balaam, son of Beor, to curse you. And I was unwilling to listen to Balaam. And in fact, he blessed you, and I saved you from his hand. And you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. And the lords of Jericho did battle against you. The Amorite and the Perizzite and the Canaanite and the Hittite and the Berghe and Hivite and Jebusite. And I gave them into your hand. And I sent the hornet before you, and it drove them from before you, the two Amorite kings, not by your sword and not by your valor. Although I gave you a land in which you had not toiled, and towns that you had not built, and you dwelled in them, from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. You are eating the fruit. And now fear the Lord and serve him in wholeness and truth. Put away the gods that your forefathers served across the Euphrates and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it be evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose today whom you would serve, whether the gods that your forefathers served across the Euphrates, or whether the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But I and my household will serve the Lord. And the people answered and said, far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For the Lord our God, it is he who brings our fathers and us up from the land of Egypt, from the house of slaves, and who has wrought before our eyes these great signs, and guarded us on all the way that we have gone, and among all the peoples through whose midst we have passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the peoples, the Amorites, and the inhabitants of the land. We too will serve the Lord, for he is our God. And Joshua said to the people, you will not be able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not put up with your crimes and your offenses. For should you forsake the Lord and serve alien gods, he shall turn back and do harm to you and put an end to you after having been good to you. And the people said to Joshua, no, for we will serve the Lord. And Joshua said to the people, you are witnesses for yourselves that you have chosen the Lord to serve him. And they said, we are witnesses. And now put away the alien gods that are in your midst, and bend your hearts to the Lord God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, the Lord we will serve, and his voice we will heed. And Joshua sealed a pact for the people on that day, and set it them for them as statute and law at Shechem. And Joshua wrote these things in the book of God's teaching. Notice, writing is showing up, folks. And he took a great stone and set it underneath the cherubim that is in God's sanctuary. And Joshua said to all the people, look, this stone shall be witness for us, because it has heard all the Lord's sayings that he spoke to us, and it shall be witness to you, lest you deny your God. Joshua sent the people, each man to his estate. And it happened after these things that Joshua, son of Nun, servant of the Lord, died 110 years old. And they buried him in the territory of his estate in Timnath-Serah. which is in the high country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gosh. And Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and who had known all the acts of the Lord that he wrought for Israel. And the bones of Joseph, which the Israelites had brought up from Egypt, they buried in Shechem, in the plot of land that Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor for 100 shekels, so that it became an estate for the sons of Joseph. And Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died. And they buried him on the hill of Phinehas, his son, which had been given to him in the high country of Ephraim. So you see, they are settling down into locations as the story develops, as God tells the story through Joshua.
And Joshua is the only leader at the beginning after Moses, he received leadership, where he brings all the different tribes together and divide them and set also leaders on. And this is the only generation after the Exodus through the desert that there's a new generation, because the old one all died in the desert. None of them came to Canaan. It was under the leadership of Joshua. And that's why it's so strong saying, me and my house will serve the Lord. And as of today, that is still a strong saying to do that, because it's a promise.
And that's where it comes from. Often, also me and my house will serve the Lord. But this is where that comes from.
Yeah, it's very strong that some people have that scripture verse also hanging in their house, because it's rooted in the obedience that Joshua and that generation had to the Lord. There was no false idols, nothing.
So I don't want it to be a spoiler, but how long did this go on for before they managed to lose Israel?
How long does it go on before they lose?
Yeah, now that they've lost, they probably going to get my chronology mixed up. But didn't they lose Israel at
They
some
get
point
into the 500s BCE, and they do.
when they were taken off?
And then for 400 years with no prophets. That was the big dark place for the Israelites. It was nothing.
And then Cyrus let them go, so those that were able to came back, accepted or didn't accept the Samaritans, so they mixed in with the local tribes. And then what happened?
Well, the story does go on.
Yeah. Okay.
It does go on. It does. It's like a periodic gain and loss.
Right.
And by the time
You have
of
to keep letting God
And by the time the last destruction of the temple occurred, by this time they're transitioning from seeing the temple as the source of where you worship to the written book. The book becomes their cornerstone rather than animal sacrifice.
Yeah, there is no place for worship,
Right.
especially when we're going over to the temple. But the synagogues means that was first prayer house and then became study house. So that's why as of today they go to the synagogue to study. Yeah, but you see that humanity as well, the Israelites in their human thinking and feeling, they expected so much from their God when they acknowledged the God. For that, probably they thought it's the sun or it's the moon or whatever. There was so much going on. But then when they really saw who really God was, then still they start getting disobedient to God. You know, 40 years through the desert, take it spiritually. It only could have taken them 3 years to go through that.
Right.
It took them 40 years. Everyone died there. And then, you know, even the brother of Moses, Aaron, started worshiping the golden calf. So everything, so it's for us a very deep spiritual thinking. Where are we in our worshiping, in our adoring and praising our God as of the through Christ in his completely victory on the cross? So for the Israelites, the way up and down, up and down, up and down, till they became a state in 1948, when they're president and they start getting it. You see where they're coming from? And they're still fighting. They're still fighting for Canaan. It became Palestine. See, it's still that. I mean, it's amazing that even through war, how the Jewish people still holding on, and they don't keep their possessions. They give it through whatever body, and they want to leave. But the family is that what is the community for them? What's hold them? And you see that through Joshua. You see that through the other leadership, that the community, especially the women, they cannot bear children. How important it is to have children, to get the community together because of the outside enemies. Because they really know that they are now a chosen people. See?
Well, they're apparently rather
Love
prolific.
and honey with Leslie.
They're apparently fairly prolific in producing new Jewish offspring, but the fighting is still an issue. They don't have a survival problem so much anymore.
Well, now they have a political leader. They don't have a spiritual leader. That will come, but we need to wait. It's not the time.
Yeah. So, any further thoughts?
It's that time. Leslie.
No further thoughts. I love it. I love it. I love it. I'm going to reread the stuff about the Stele. I found some on the internet.
Yeah.
Hi, Roberto.
Hi, Roberto.
Hi. Sorry I'm so late.
That's fine. It's nice eating. You cannot have.
All right. Oh, you guys froze up on me.
Interesting, eh, Leslie? The Stele,
Video,
she's frozen.
video's frozen.
Yeah.
Our internet is.
No, I'm not. I'm turning on my light.
Oh, okay.
Oh, we got motion now. All right. How you doing, Leslie?
I'm doing okay. How are you, Roberto?
I'm doing fine. Why is everybody so quiet?
I don't know. As Mother Martha was reading us about Joshua and the judges and the whole beginning of the civilization of the Israelites, and
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, the handouts were really nice that we got.
Mhm.
Enjoyed those.
Of Yeti's work, not mine. She's much more industrious than I am.
I like archaeology, and I like to dive deep.
Very, very interesting.
If you can go back and listen to it when the recording goes up, it was pretty interesting discussion about the archaeology and its relationship to scripture that we're reading. The scripture is so beautiful. Yes.
This is a religious question, but it's off topic. I belong to Twitter, and occasionally they have religious articles. And someone asked the question, you know how the Ten Commandments, it's everywhere, in schools, churches. Would you consider the Beatitudes equal to the Ten Commandments? Why wouldn't we have the Beatitudes with the same type of respect?
I think probably, my guess is, that the Ten Commandments or some version thereof is pretty well accepted across the Abrahamic religions, Jews, Christians, and Islam also. But many of them, they respect the same kind of thing, and I suspect that that's probably why you see it in more places, though there's been many.
The attitudes were from Christ himself.
Right.
I think it's easier to understand.
It is.
I think it's easier to understand because it's a list of rules.
Yeah.
It's very deontological. But the Beatitudes are subtle. The Beatitudes require the inspiration of the Holy Spirit to really get a hold of. It's not a bunch of rules. It's the complete opposite. So I think the Beatitudes are more difficult for people to grasp. Poverty of the spirit, for example. I mean, what does that mean? Johann Metz, I mean, there are all these medieval late scholars talking about what poverty of the spirit means. That's not that obvious, but the Ten Commandments are pretty darn clear. It's a bunch of deontological rules. So for me, those rules are fine. Okay, I got the rules, but the Beatitudes are life-changing.
That's what I'm saying. That's what, in my opinion, this is blasphemous. They appear to be more important to me. And it takes more intellectual curiosity to study them.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to do that than rules. Rules are pretty straightforward. Anybody can learn rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the Beatitudes, as you said, it takes more thought.
But it's the doing.
It's the doing, yeah, it's the doing.
It's more aspirational. If blessed are you, if you're doing these things.
But it's also it's asking people to give up what they might feel is their own importance without.
Yes.
Yes.
Terms, but
Very much so. They're ego shattering. Yeah, they really are. So, Jesus came to fulfill the law and the prophets.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, that's what we've been told. Yes.
He reinterpreted the law and the prophets. The other thing that's kind of fun to do is to restate the Ten Commandments in positives instead of negatives.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's I can't even think how I've done it in the past, but
I mean, would people accept that approach?
I'm sorry?
Would people accept that approach?
No, they don't. I taught it when I was teaching Christian ethics. No, people didn't particularly like it because they like the rules and they're prescriptive. They're very negative. You will not do this. You will not do that. The one that requires the most interpretation is thou shalt have no idols before me. That one, then you really have to think about what am I putting ahead of God? But the other ones, they're like koans. They're like little Zen poems, like riddles. You have to really think about it. What does poverty of the spirit mean? What does it mean to mourn? What is the promise of the kingdom? If I undergo these struggles, or like in Arabic, they call jihad, it just means a struggle. If I undergo these struggles, I have promises. It's not a bunch of rules.
Yeah. Because to me, the Beatitudes, I always read more into them, more than I actually realized, than the Ten Commandments. And you're giving an excellent explanation to me what it is.
Yeah.
Things I hadn't thought of or conceived, it came from Christ himself, not from some prophet or an oral tradition from man himself,
No, and this is why I think, what was the name of the woman who was the famous atheist?
Madeline.
Yes. Okay. She basically got prayer out of the schools and the Ten Commandments out of the courtrooms. I think that's the appropriate thing to do. Because I think freedom of religion requires freedom from religion. And those rules don't serve a purpose if they're everywhere. You know, they just become, oh, it's the 10 Commandments. But the Beatitudes require prayerful thought, as you put it. They really do. Because they're counterintuitive. That's why they're like Zen riddles.
Yeah, a lot of people don't have to take the
Why would
time.
it be if I'm mourning that I get a promise? Why would that be? You know, what is the promise? What it tells you is they're all shattering the ego,
Yes.
I think.
Yeah,
And that's the first step towards understanding who Christ is. You know, who is so whole in himself. And in you reading that, I found it interesting they used the word whole to worship. I can't remember what it was, but the word whole, you know, that's my usual word when we talk about worship. But what does that mean? We come with our full humanity, you know, body, soul, spirit, heart, everything. Whole. We worship with everything, including our body. That's why Catholicism is so interesting. It's very incarnational. We're always moving around and doing something.
Yes.
Yes, or you know, we're eating, or we're drinking, or we're always, you know, it's incarnational.
Carry the cross. Hugging the trees. Thank you, Leslie. That was enlightening. Thank you.
awesome, Leslie, thank you. You give us a high lift at the end of the hour. We appreciate it.
Well, it's a great question about the Beatitudes and the 10 Commandments. It's a great question.
I've always thought that about the attitudes, and I've sometimes wondered why doesn't anybody else talk? Not that I'm a scholar, I'm just creating
Mm-hmm.
questions about
Mm-hmm.
it.
But oops, there's my train. Sorry, there's my train. I think the Beatitudes are also about struggle.
Yeah,
Spiritual struggle, about letting go. Because you can't control mourning and you can't control poverty of the spirit. You can't control them. They're out of your control, utterly beyond it. So you give it over. And that's how you get the promise.
wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with that, Leslie, give us a prayer and a blessing.
We'll see if my train comes by again. I actually like my train. I don't know why I do, but I do. Okay, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Holy Lord, we thank you for this time together that stretches our minds and our hearts and our spirits and our souls. We thank you for Mother Martha and Mother Jetty, who are leading us along this path that will always end with you, because you are the end and the beginning and the everything. And now I will bless you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Right.
Thank you.
You have to send us out there.
Love you guys.
Go and love and serve the Lord and one another. This is Southern California Edison turning off my air conditioning.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's what happens when you have a smart house. They get their hands in everything. Okay, nice to see you.
That was a quick one. Good to see you all. At least I got a chance to see you.
Yeah. Goodbye.
Okay.
Night, all.
Bye.
Bye.